What makes a story truly terrifying isn't special effects or clever writing. It's the fact that it comes from real people living normal lives until something unexplainable stepped into their world. These moments hit without warning in the places we trust the most, reminding us of a simple truth. If it happened to them, it could happen to you too. Before we begin, let me ask you this. What's the one winter memory that still sends a chill down your spine? Share it in the comments below. I read every one of them, and who knows, your experience might inspire a future episode. Everything you're about to hear tonight comes directly from the people who lived through it. And if you've ever encountered something strange, unsettling, or impossible, I had been driving since dawn, trying to make it from Minneapolis to my sister's place in Montana before the weekend, thinking this winter road trip would be a quick, peaceful break before Christmas. It was just me, my old Subaru, and some terrible gas station coffee that barely kept me awake. Everything felt normal until the snow started falling harder as I got farther north. At first, it was light and annoying, but as the sun dipped behind the clouds, it thickened into a heavy white curtain that my headlights could barely cut through. Within an hour, the highway was covered so completely that I couldn't tell where the road ended and the ditch began. Each mile made my grip on the wheel tighter. With my nerves stretched thin, I told myself I'd pull into the next place I saw and wait out the storm. Maybe 15 minutes later, a glow appeared on the right side of the road, barely visible through the blizzard. I pulled in without even reading what the sign said. The parking lot was small, buried, and nearly empty except for 3 cars, one of them so covered in snow it looked like it had been there for days. The other 2 looked recent. I parked and trudged through the storm until I stumbled into what turned out to be an old roadside cafe. It felt like stepping into another decade. Dim lights, wood paneling, a bar counter at the front. 2 men sat sipping coffee in eerie silence, and a woman stood behind the counter wiping down mugs. The moment I opened the door, they all looked at me at the same time and gave the same strange, overly cheerful greeting. I laughed nervously, feeling like I'd walked into the middle of something I didn't understand. I sat at the bar and ordered coffee. Both men told me they'd pulled in for the same reason as me, escaping the whiteout conditions. But something felt weird. One of the guys, maybe in his 50s, looked half dead, pale, eyes glassy, movements slow and stiff like he was freezing from the inside out. Even when he breathed, he barely seemed alive. After a few moments of awkward chatter, the cafe went silent again, just like when I first walked in. The silence was thick and uncomfortable. Out of nowhere, one of the men stood up, muttering something about reaching his cabin before the roads closed. He hurried to his car, sat for a moment as it warmed up, then pulled out of the lot. The second man got up and left without a word. I watched from the window, expecting him to drive away too, but after a long minute, nothing happened. I went back to the bar and asked the woman if something was up with those guys. She shrugged and mentioned they seemed like they had been arguing in the parking lot before coming inside. Maybe road rage or something. She wasn't too bothered. We made small talk for half an hour, while outside the snow kept falling in thick waves. But when I walked back to the window to check on the storm, I saw both men's cars still sitting in the lot. Neither man inside, neither man outside, just abandoned. A chill ran down my spine. No one would stay out in that blizzard for that long. I stepped outside for a better look, feeling the wind slice into my face like needles. I scanned the lot. Nothing but swirling snow and tire tracks being buried by the minute. Something was very wrong. My instinct screamed at me to leave. I trudged to my car, planning to warm it up and get out of there as soon as the storm allowed. But when I turned the key, the engine didn't just struggle. It didn't turn over at all. Not even a click. Completely dead. My heart sank. My car had been perfectly fine earlier. There was no reason for it to suddenly die. That's when the panic set in. I knew one of those guys had done something. It sounded paranoid, but the feeling was too strong to ignore. As I sat there in my dead car trying to breathe calmly, I suddenly noticed movement near the back of the lot. A dark figure walked out from the tree line behind the cafe. Slow, steady, purposeful. Even through the storm I recognized him. The half-dead-looking man. But now, seeing him emerge from the woods instead of from a car, every instinct inside me screamed to run. I bolted from the Subaru and sprinted inside, slamming the cafe door shut and locking it. The woman stared at me like I'd lost my mind. I blurted out everything, how I'd seen him, how the cars were still in the lot, how my engine wouldn't even make a sound. She hesitated, confused, but grabbed the phone and dialed 911. A minute later, the man appeared at the door. He didn't knock. He pushed, hard. When it didn't open, he stepped closer until his face was pressed against the glass. His eyes were bloodshot, unblinking, frozen in that lifeless stare. He locked onto me instantly, raising one hand to the door like he was testing the glass, then suddenly slammed his fist into it. I felt the whole pane shake. My heart was pounding so fast I felt dizzy. He didn't try to speak, didn't try to explain. He just watched me with this strange hunger, like he wasn't there for the woman or anyone else. He was there for me. After 10 long seconds, he turned around, ran to his car, and sped off into the storm. Minutes later, the police arrived, but the man was gone. They checked the parking lot and found faint tracks leading into the woods. A search followed, and about an hour later, they returned with grim faces. They'd found the other man's body. No missing wallet, no robbery, just a brutal, senseless attack. The officer said the man's car had the same issue mine had. The ignition line was deliberately cut, which meant the killer didn't want him leaving. And he didn't want me leaving either. The police pieced the timeline together easily. The two men must have argued outside. At some point, the killer cut the victim's ignition line. When the victim tried to drive off, the car wouldn't start, and the killer followed him out into the woods where the storm and the wind hid everything from the cafe. And during the half hour before I noticed anything strange, the killer used that same storm as cover to crouch by my car and cut my ignition line too. If I had gone outside just a few minutes earlier, or if he had come out of those woods a few minutes later, I would have been alone in that parking lot with him. Instead, all I have left is the image of him emerging from the trees, walking through the snow with that empty gaze, heading straight toward me. I made it safely to my sister's house, but I never heard another update about him. They never found him. And I don't think I'll ever take a winter road trip again, because sometimes when the wind is loud enough and the snow is thick enough, I swear I can still see that pale figure pushing through the storm toward me, like he's still looking for the one who got away. I was 25 when this happened, just a few days before Christmas, and I still remember how strangely peaceful that morning felt before everything went wrong. I had taken the whole week off from going into the office because a huge winter storm was supposed to hit our town. With my company's flexible remote schedule, I figured I'd stay home, sleep in, and work late into the night, like I usually did. That day, I started work around noon. The hours felt quiet, almost too quiet, as I sipped my coffee and typed away while the wind outside slowly grew stronger. By late afternoon, the sky had turned dark, even though the sun wasn't fully down yet. Heavy snowflakes were crashing against my window, and every gust of wind made the glass shudder. I was planning to go grab dinner, but the storm outside looked miserable, so I stayed home. I kept my window shades open, letting the white blur of the storm keep me company while I worked. That was when I saw it, a flicker. Then, a beam of light, dragging slowly across the snow. Someone outside had a flashlight. I froze for a moment, watching it drift around the side of my house, as if the person was searching for something. Curiosity got the better of me, so I got up and pressed my face close to the cold glass, trying to see through the storm. I barely caught the edge of the beam before it suddenly disappeared, swallowed by the darkness. I assumed it was a neighbor looking for a lost pet. The storm was loud enough to distort anything, so I let it go. I went back to my desk and tried focusing, but the house kept making strange noises. At first, it was the usual creaking, but then there were sharper sounds mixed in, little thuds that didn't feel like the walls settling. I kept pausing and listening, waiting to hear something again. For a while, nothing happened. Then came the thud that changed everything. It was loud, sharp, and definitely inside the house. My stomach twisted as I stood up and walked down the hallway, then downstairs. The living room looked normal. The kitchen was quiet, and no more noises followed. I wasn't scared enough to do a full sweep of the house, so I tried to shrug it off and headed back upstairs. I had just reached the top step when the entire house went dark. A click, then complete blackness, the kind where you can't even see your own hands. The storm had knocked out the power. At least, that's what I told myself. I tried to stay calm as I carefully made my way back downstairs, feeling along the wall to keep my balance. The basement door, the one that led to the breaker box, was at the end of the hallway. As I followed the wall, I heard something that stopped me cold. Movement, slow, muffled. Coming from behind the basement door, then, without warning, I heard the faint creak of the door opening. My chest tightened. Someone was in my house. I stepped backward silently, slipping into the bathroom beside me. I couldn't close the door. The sound would give me away. I just stood there, holding my breath, my heart pounding so loudly I swore whoever was out there could hear it. Quiet footsteps began moving down the hallway. Each one was soft but unmistakably human. They came closer and closer until I knew, without seeing anything, that the person was standing right outside the bathroom door. Inches away, the footsteps passed by slowly. I never saw their shape, never even a shadow, because the darkness inside the house was absolute. But I felt them. I felt the air shift as they moved. I listened as the footsteps reached the stairs and then vanished into silence when they hit the carpet. Now the only sound left was the raging storm outside. I had no idea if the person had gone all the way upstairs or was still standing at the very top step. But if I stayed where I was, I'd be trapped, so I made a choice. Run. I slipped out of the bathroom and moved blindly through the darkness, hands outstretched so I wouldn't smash into a wall. I reached the garage door by memory, grabbed my keys, and pushed through the side door into the freezing night. I sprinted to my car, brushed snow off the handle, and jumped in. I started the engine and sped down the street, not caring that the roads were covered in ice. I used the car's SOS system to call the police. When they arrived at my house, the intruder was long gone. But what they found made my blood run cold. Whoever it was had broken into the house and then cut the power manually. They had gone straight upstairs to my office and then to my bedroom, walking perfectly through the house despite the total darkness. They knew exactly where my rooms were. They knew where I worked. They knew the layout of my home well enough to move with total confidence. This wasn't random. This person had come specifically for me. And the flashlight I'd seen earlier wasn't someone searching for a pet. It had been someone scouting my house, mapping out the angles and windows through the snow. For months afterward, I questioned every coworker, every acquaintance, every person who knew I lived alone and worked late. The idea that someone I spoke to casually could have been the one walking inches from my hiding place kept me awake more nights than I can count. I moved away not long after, and nothing has happened since. But sometimes, when a storm rolls in, and the wind hits my windows the same way it did that night, I still imagine those quiet footsteps brushing past the bathroom door, searching the darkness for me. When my 3-year relationship ended, the silence in my townhouse became something I could physically feel, like a weight pressing on my chest every time I walked through the door. I wasn't used to being alone anymore, and Christmas only made the emptiness louder. Every year I had decorated a tree with someone, shared a bottle of wine with someone, woken up on Christmas morning next to someone. Now it was just me, a hollow living room, and a holiday I suddenly didn't know how to celebrate. Out of loneliness more than hope, I reinstalled Tinder and began swiping without caring, letting faces pass by like noise. Then, Jade appeared. No interesting photos, barely a bio, nothing that should have caught my attention, yet she messaged instantly, with a kind of urgency that felt out of place. After only a few minutes, she asked if she could come over that night to help decorate my Christmas tree and drink wine. It was reckless, too forward, clearly a bad idea, but loneliness can make even strange invitations feel like lifelines, so I agreed before thinking it through. I cleaned the place like I was expecting someone important, straightened the ornaments, wiped the counters, and kept glancing at the clock as if preparing for a date instead of a stranger. When the doorbell finally rang at 9:30, I opened it and felt my stomach dip. Jade was taller than I imagined, close to 6 feet, wrapped in a heavy coat, with the hood hiding most of her face. A wave of cheap perfume mixed with sweat and something damp hit me before she even stepped inside. Her hug was tight, too tight, her body trembling like she was freezing or nervous, or both. She acted cheerful, but there was something frantic behind her smile that I pushed aside because I didn't want to feel alone that night. We sat on the couch, her knee brushing mine, and when I handed her a glass of wine, she gulped half of it instantly, spilling some on the cushion without apologizing. Her hands shook so violently, I thought she might drop the glass entirely. Her eyes never settled. They darted from the TV to the hallway to the bathroom door, scanning the room like she was checking for something hidden. A knot formed in my stomach, but I offered to bring down the Christmas tree, hoping an activity might ease the tension. Instead, Jade grabbed the entire storage box herself and carried it down like it weighed nothing. When I went to the crawl space for the ornaments, dizziness hit me so fast I had to grab the metal shelves to keep from falling. I blamed the wine even though I had barely taken 2 sips. When I returned, Jade was pouring more wine into my glass, her fingers twitching, her breathing uneven. I drank it without thinking because I didn't want to seem rude. Within minutes, the walls softened, my arms felt heavy, and my legs buckled beneath me. I sank into the couch, numbness spreading through my body like cold water. My tongue felt thick, my vision blurred, and fear slowly crawled up my spine as I realized I couldn't move. Not fully, not even close. My head drooped backward as sounds around me muffled and stretched, and Jade's silhouette moved in and out of my fading vision like a shadow that wouldn't stay still. When I woke again, the room was dark, except for the faint glow of the Christmas tree. I was lying exactly where I had collapsed, unable to lift my arms or legs. I could breathe, but every breath felt trapped in my chest. My mind was awake, but my body was frozen, a terrifying disconnect. Then, I heard footsteps, slow, uneven, followed by something breaking in the kitchen. A glass? A bottle? Jade's voice floated through the room, low and frantic, muttering words I couldn't understand. She walked into view and the hood was gone now. Her hair was a tangled mess and her eyes were wide with something that looked like paranoia twisted into desperation. "Where is it?" she whispered, staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Before I could process what she meant, she pulled a box cutter from her coat pocket. The metal glinted in the tree lights as she leaned over me, placing her knee on my chest, her breath hot and sour against my cheek. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. She pressed the blade lightly to my throat, not enough to cut, but enough to freeze my blood. "Tell me where it is," she hissed. My heart slammed against my ribs. I couldn't blink, couldn't speak. couldn't even turn my head. I was trapped inside my own body as she pried at my jaw with shaking fingers, trying to force my mouth open like she thought I was hiding something inside. Her movements were jerky, fueled by panic more than intention, and every second felt like it was stretching out forever. Then, from outside, a car horn blared. Once, twice, loud enough to rattle the window. Jade's entire body tensed. She looked toward the door, grabbed her bag, swept random things off my counter, and bolted. The door slammed, echoing through the room, and I lay there, paralyzed and terrified in the silence she left behind. It took almost an hour before I could move my fingers, another before I could sit up, and everything in that house felt tainted by the memory of her kneeling over me with a blade. Later, I realized she had stolen nothing of value except my prescription pills. The police couldn't track her. The Tinder profile was deleted. And the last image burned in my mind is her silhouette leaning over me, whispering through clenched teeth as the Christmas lights flickered beside her. A reminder that sometimes the scariest Christmas stories come from the people we let in, simply because we don't want to feel alone. It was supposed to be a simple Christmas escape, a quiet break from the noise of the city, but December of 2023 became the trip that still chills me whenever I think about the Poconos. Charlotte and I had booked a small Airbnb cabin tucked deep into the woods, far off any main road, a place the listing called peaceful and isolated, which at the time sounded perfect. By the time we arrived, the sky was already turning gray, and the snow was falling so heavily that the world around us looked erased. The house sat alone at the end of a narrow, winding road that our Jeep barely managed to climb. The cabin looked like something out of a winter postcard, draped in white and surrounded by towering trees that seemed to lean in like they were guarding it. But the deeper we drove into that silence, the more uneasy I felt. Inside, everything was warm and welcoming, the fireplace crackling and Christmas lights glowing softly across the beams. It smelled like pine and burnt wood, a comforting but strangely haunting mixture. Charlotte loved it instantly, spinning around like a kid on Christmas morning. But I kept thinking about how the basement door had been locked with heavy bolts for no clear reason. When I walked down there earlier to check the place out, the air felt stale and cold, and the metal door that led to the backyard looked like it belonged in a bunker, not a cozy mountain cabin. I told myself it was nothing and tried to relax. That illusion shattered when someone knocked. It was already dark, and the storm made everything outside look blurry and distorted. I opened the door and saw a man standing on the porch, bundled in old sweats and a ripped jacket. His smile looked like it had been practiced in a mirror, but never perfected. He introduced himself as Tom, said he was the host's brother, and lived nearby. At first he seemed friendly, but then his comments started to feel wrong. He mentioned our Jeep parked behind the cabin, even though he shouldn't have been able to see it from the road. He complimented Charlotte in a way that wasn't a compliment at all, lingering on her face too long before smiling at me again. He said the cabin's hot water might break and insisted we call him, not the host. When he finally walked off into the storm, Charlotte brushed it off, but something about the way he kept staring back at the windows made my skin crawl. That night, we tried to unwind in the hot tub, watching the snow fall onto the deck. It was peaceful until the water suddenly turned ice cold and the jets shut off with a sputter. Charlotte jumped out shivering, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps crunching slowly around the cabin. Someone was out there circling us. I called out, but the storm swallowed my voice. All I saw were shifting shadows behind the trees. We ran inside and locked the doors, turning every light on like kids afraid of the dark. The sense of being watched stayed with us long after. Hours later, just as we were starting a movie, a violent bang shook the front door. I jumped up, my heart pounding as I looked through the peephole. I could barely see anything, but I heard the metal scrape of someone trying a key. Then the rattling moved to the windows. First the front, then the side, then the back. It wasn't random. Whoever it was knew exactly where all the entrances were. Without cell service, we sat there frozen, listening to the steady tap of knuckles dragging along the glass. It went on for what felt like forever. When morning came, I walked out onto the snow-covered deck to catch my breath. And that's when I saw the footprints. They were fresh, deep, and they led straight to the basement door from the woods. Before I could process it, Tom showed up, cheerfully asking if the hot water had acted up. He insisted he needed to check the basement. Something inside me screamed not to let him in, but exhaustion and fear made me hesitate. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. As soon as he stepped inside, I messaged the host, asking if Tom was really his brother. The response came back in seconds. He didn't know anyone named Tom. My vision tunneled. Charlotte saw the look on my face and grabbed my arm. The metallic clinking from the basement told me he was already downstairs. I whispered for her to pack whatever she could and meet me by the Jeep. We moved like ghosts, trying not to make a sound. When I cracked the cabin door open to leave, I heard heavy footsteps pounding up the basement stairs. We bolted. I shoved Charlotte into the Jeep, started the engine, and saw Tom burst through the doorway holding a wrench, his face twisted into something that didn't look like a greeting anymore. He stepped off the porch as if he was ready to sprint toward us, but the Jeep's tires caught traction just in time, and we sped down the mountain, fishtailing through the snow. In the rearview mirror, he stood at the end of the driveway, watching us leave, not moving, not shouting, just staring like he'd been waiting for the right moment to act. Even now, I still don't know who he was or how long he'd been watching that cabin, but I know we weren't his first visitors. And I know we weren't supposed to make it out before the storm cut us off completely. Christmas Eve of 2004 should have been quiet and simple, but instead, it became a night that still crawls back into my memory whenever winter settles in again. The snow outside had been falling since the afternoon without stopping, layering everything in thick white piles that swallowed sound and made the world feel far away. Inside our house, the silence felt heavy enough to crush me. Dad was working another overnight shift at the hospital, something I had grown used to, and Mom was upstairs passed out in her room after drinking all evening. I was only 7, but I had learned that when the house fell this quiet, it meant I needed to take care of things, and tonight, that included my little sister Lucia, who was sitting beside me on the couch crying because she did not understand why Mom would not wake up. It was supposed to be Hanukkah, but nothing about the night felt warm or safe or special. I was trying to calm Lucia down when it started. A knock at the door. Not a soft one, not the kind neighbors used when they came to drop off cookies or wish us happy holidays. This was a slow, heavy knock that made the entire door vibrate and made Lucia grip my shirt. I crept toward the entryway and climbed onto the stool so I could look through the small glass panels. What I saw standing on the porch made my stomach twist. A man in a Santa suit stared straight at me. The suit was filthy, crusted with dirt that had turned the white fur into a dull gray, and the red fabric sagged on his body like he had pulled it out of a dumpster. His beard looked cheap and uneven, more like a clump of tangled white strings than anything real. His eyes were the worst, wide and bloodshot, with a strange shine that made it impossible to look away. He smiled at me in a way that made everything inside me go cold, and then he spoke. He said my name, Ari, just like that, like he had known me forever. He told me to open the door. He told me he had presents for me and for Lucia. Hearing him say her name made my heart race. I backed away from the glass, shaking my head, whispering to myself that this could not be happening. The man leaned closer until his face was pressed against the cold glass, his breath fogging the window as he whispered again that he knew we were alone tonight. I ran back to the living room and grabbed the phone, telling Lucia not to move, but before I could even dial, the pounding on the door started again, louder, harder. Each strike of his fist made the whole frame rattle. I finally managed to call 911, trying to explain that a strange man dressed as Santa was trying to get inside our house. The dispatcher did not take me seriously. She told me to relax, said I was probably imagining things, told me to go to bed and let my parents handle it in the morning. I hung up and knew without a doubt that we were on our own. Another hit slammed against the door. Then another. The man shouted that he knew Mom was passed out upstairs and that no one was coming to help us. His voice was deeper now, rougher, and every bang sent Lucia screaming up the stairs. I knew he would break the door eventually if I did nothing, and I panicked, looking for anything that could help. My eyes landed on the menorah still burning on the table. The candles flickered, and I had an idea I did not fully understand but acted on anyway. I grabbed a handful of old newspapers, lit them carefully, and held them under the smoke detector. Within seconds, the alarm shrieked through the entire house, a piercing sound that echoed all the way out to the street. The banging stopped abruptly. I ran back to the window and saw the man step off the porch, looking toward the approaching sirens. Instead of running, he sprinted toward the firefighters and shouted that his children were trapped inside this house, yelling that his wife had passed out and he could not get in. The firefighters rushed forward carrying axes, ready to break the door down, but I screamed through the window that he was lying. I told them he was not my father, told them we were Jewish and did not celebrate Christmas, told them he knew our names even though we had never met him. Confusion crossed their faces, and finally the police car pulled up behind them. Officers jumped out and pinned the man to the ground as he laughed, not trying to fight them, just smiling like the whole thing was a game. They searched the black sack he carried, and what spilled onto the snow made several officers step back. It was not toys, not anything close. Rope, tape, syringes, a long metal tool that looked sharp enough to pry open anything, a mask, gloves, things a 7-year-old should never have seen. As they dragged him away, he turned his head to look at me with that same twisted smile, his eyes locked onto mine like he wanted me to remember him. And I do. Every Christmas Eve since then, I remember the sound of his voice whispering through the glass, telling me he had come for me and for Lucia. It was a few nights before Christmas when this happened, sometime between the holiday and New Year's, and every detail still plays in my head like it happened last week. I was back home from college for winter break, trying to make some extra cash, so whenever I wasn't with family, I was door dashing around town. A snowstorm had rolled in that night, thick enough to make everything look like a postcard, but not dangerous enough to shut down the roads. Nights like that were usually great for delivery drivers because nobody wanted to step outside, and I was getting steady orders all evening. Around 10 o'clock, things slowed down, but I picked up another one, farther out than usual. Maybe 20 minutes from town. My hometown is small, but stretched across forests and long roads, so some houses feel like they're just dropped in the middle of nowhere. When I reached the address on the app, though, I felt uneasy immediately. The GPS told me I had arrived, but instead of a house or even a visible driveway, all I saw was a buried path leading into pitch-black woods. The driveway looked like a trench swallowed by snow. Not a single light, not a porch glow, not a window flicker, just darkness swallowing the trees. I stayed inside my car and called the customer, thinking it had to be the wrong address. He answered on the first ring. His voice sounded like he smoked a pack before answering. I explained I was at the marked spot but didn't see a house anywhere. He snapped back that the driveway was obviously under snow, and I should just walk it because that's what delivery drivers are for. Something about the way he said it was wrong, but I didn't want a cancellation or bad rating, so I stupidly agreed. I grabbed the order, stepped into the cold, and locked my car behind me. The snow wasn't too deep, but the ground underneath was uneven, and without any light guiding me, the path ahead looked like a black tunnel. Every few steps I turned around, watching my car grow smaller behind me, its headlights the only thing keeping me from being totally swallowed by the forest. Then, somewhere off to my left, I heard a single crunch, too heavy for an animal, too deliberate, like a boot stepping down. I spun toward the sound, shining my phone's flashlight, but the weak beam dissolved into the falling snow. Nothing moved, no follow-up sound, just darkness settling again. I kept walking, but every part of my body screamed that something wasn't right. I should have reached at least a glimpse of a house by then, a mailbox, a fence, anything. But there was nothing. The forest felt endless, like I'd stepped into the wrong world. And then it hit me all at once. What if there was no house? What if this address wasn't real? What if someone had sent me here on purpose? That thought punched the air out of me. Standing there in the dark, completely alone, I took out my phone and called the customer again. It rang once, twice. Then, in my peripheral vision, a small light flickered between the trees. A flashlight beam. It blinked out instantly, like whoever held it didn't want to be seen. At that exact moment, my call dropped. I didn't even think, I just ran. I sprinted back through the snow, slipping, gasping, not daring to look behind me, because the fear of what I might see was worse than not knowing. My footsteps were the only sound, crunching so loudly I couldn't tell if someone else was running behind me or not. When I finally burst into the clearing where my car was parked, my relief lasted half a second. Something was wrong. The entire car leaned awkwardly to one side. My stomach flipped as I ran closer and saw the front tire flattened. Not from the cold, not from a nail, slashed. A clean, deliberate cut. Someone had walked up to my car while I was in the woods and disabled it. The same someone who wanted me to walk deeper into the forest. I didn't care if the rim got destroyed. I jumped in, started the engine, and floored it, the car fishtailing as I forced it back onto the main road. Only then, with my heart still pounding, did I call the police. They asked questions, but I could tell they didn't take the situation seriously. No suspect, no physical confrontation, just a weird address and a slashed tire. But I knew exactly what it was. Someone had lured me into those woods with a fake order. Someone waited for me out there, hiding in the dark with a flashlight. And someone had plans for me that night that had nothing to do with getting food delivered. I still DoorDash sometimes, but I never again take orders far outside town, especially not in the snow, and definitely not down a driveway where I can't see a single light at the end. Because now I know the truth. Some people don't order food because they're hungry. Some people order because they're hunting.